darkness, and a heavy silence prevailed. Only the hooting of owls could be heard from a distance. I and my friend Saeed clung to each other in fear and walked towards the old ruins of the village. Saeed stuttered, "Are you sure there are a jinn here?" I replied in a trembling voice. "They say an old woman used to live here who was friends with the jinn. After her death, her spirit roams here." We had not walked a few more steps when suddenly a cold breeze blew and ruffled our hair. The door of one of the ruined houses slammed shut, and a terrifying scream came from inside. Saeed screamed in fear and wanted to go back, but I was determined to uncover the mystery of this place. We slowly approached the house from which the sound came. The door of the house was half open, and a faint light was shining from inside. We cautiously looked inside the house. A hunched old woman with long white hair was standing in the middle of the room. Her eyes were red and sparkling, and her face was terrifying. She whispered in a muffled and eerie voice, "Welcome to me." Fear gripped our entire being. Saeed screamed and ran away, but I was transfixed, staring at the old woman. She slowly walked towards me, and her whispers grew louder. Suddenly, a black shadow enveloped me from behind. I felt an icy hand on my shoulder. I screamed with all my might and passed out. When I woke up, I was in my house. My mother was sitting by my side, looking at me with concern. "What happened to you?" I said in a weak voice. "Saeed, the ruins, the old woman." My mother said in a calm voice, "Saeed is safe. He found you and brought you home, but you were very scared and you have a fever." I never figured out what happened that night. Did I really see a jinn, or was it just an illusion? But one thing I know, that night in the ruins of the village I experienced absolute horror. Years have passed since that night, but still, sometimes in my sleep, I see the old woman's terrifying face and hear her screams in my ears. The mystery of those ruins and that old woman still remains unsolved for me. After that horrific night, Saeed and I never went near the ruins of the village again, but the shadow of that night remained in our minds forever. Sometimes at night, I would hear the old woman's screams in my sleep and shiver with fear. Saeed too had become extremely fearful after that night, and was terrified of anything that seemed supernatural. A few months later, another strange incident happened in the village. One of the villagers who lived alone in a farm disappeared. No trace of him was found, and no one knew what happened to him. Some of the villagers believed that he was kidnapped by the jinn. They said that the old woman's spirit was still wandering in the ruins and looking for a victim. This incident caused panic and anxiety in the village. People stayed in their homes at night out of fear and did not dare to leave their homes alone. One night, Saeed and I were talking about these events when suddenly we heard a terrifying scream from a distance. We rushed toward the source of the sound. We reached the farm where the man lived. The door of the farm was open, and the man's lifeless body was lying in the middle of the yard. His face was badly bruised, and there were deep scratches on his body. It looked like he had been killed with force. This was a horrific incident that shocked everyone in the village. There was no doubt left that there was an evil force in the village. After this incident, Saeed and I decided to flee the village. We could no longer live in that terrifying place. We left the village at night and went to another city. We never returned to that village, but the terrifying memories we had there will remain in our minds forever. Still, after years, I don't know who killed that man. Was it the old woman possessed by a jinn? Or was there a serial killer in the village? But one thing I know, that night on the farm I saw absolute horror with my own eyes. Years passed after those horrific events in the village, Saeed and I had both started a new life in the new city, but the memories of those nights still sometimes came to us in sleep and wakefulness. One day, Saeed called me and said that he had heard strange news. He said that a group of paranormal investigators had come to our village to uncover the mystery of those ruins and that haunted old woman. I was deeply curious. Although I was still terrified of those memories, I wanted to understand what had happened in that village. Saeed and I decided to return to the village and join that group of paranormal investigators. When we arrived at the village, we realized that many things had changed. The ruins had been completely demolished, and a new park had been built in their place. We looked for the paranormal investigator group and found them in one of the houses in the village. They told us that they'd been investigating for a few weeks and had found some interesting results. They believed that the haunted old woman never existed. They said that all these events were due to a mass hallucination. They had also found evidence that the man had been murdered by a serial killer. Hearing these words, I felt a little relieved. Finally, I understood that the old woman was just an illusion, and I had only experienced a terrible nightmare that night. But one question still lingered in my mind. Who had killed that man? The paranormal investigators told us that they were still investigating and would soon find the killer. Saeed and I returned to the city, but still sometimes think about that village. We know that the mystery of those nights will forever remain